Hello everyone and welcome back to the Tata Steel Rapid event of the Grand Chess Tour. It's Levon Aronian versus Magnus Carlsen in round 3 of the event. It's really a wild game, so I do hope you enjoyed. But before we check out the game, I would just like to invite everyone to check out a very nice interview. It was done by Shagar Shah from ChessBase India. He interviewed Magnus Carlsen about, mostly about Vishwanathan Anand, as it's soon to be Vish's 50th birthday, I think on December 11th. Will be his 50th birthday, and they asked Magnus a couple of things about him, about Vichy, and if he can, from memory, recognize 10 positions from 10 of Anand's games. So it's a really nice interview. I do hope you enjoy it. It will be the first link you see in the description below. It's not very long, so feel free to check it out if you haven't already. Now, getting back to the game, Levon with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c5 by Magnus, knight to f3, we have d6, and now d4. C captures on d4, we have knight captures, knight to f6, that's not a knight, knight to c3, and a6. The Najdorf variation is on the board, and it's not surprising, since Levon already faced two Najdorfs in a rapid event in Bucharest, in Romania, in the Superbet Rapid and Blitz. He played it against Giri and Wesley So we have f3, e5, pushing the knight back, knight to b3, and now bishop to e6. Magnus continues development, bishop to e3, and in that event we mentioned that both Wesley and Giri played the bishop to e7, and here we have knight to d7. So Carlsen deviates from the line. Levon played against Giri and Wesley. We have g4, now preparing to further expand on the king side, bishop to e7, and queen to d2. Here Levon prepares a queenside castle. We have castles by black and queenside castles by white. So here we have castles on opposite sides. It's Sicilian Najdorf. It's everything you can hope for in a rapid game between two such great players. So basically it will be a race. Black will attack on the queen side, white will try and attack on the king side, and who will be faster. So b5, Carlsen starts expanding on the queen side, and g5. Levon does the same on the king side. Knight to h5, and now king to b1, always a useful move. We have knight to b6 by Magnus, and now comes knight to a5. For the moment, there aren't any discoveries, so you cannot move the knight to expose the attack of the queen to the knight here. We have rook to c8, Magnus continues development, and now a3. We have g6 by Magnus, now cementing this knight here. Also, at some point you might want to move the rook, maybe get the bishop over to g7 if needed. We have h4 by Levon, and now comes knight to g3. And this position has been reached in the Prague Masters tournament this year between David Navara and Radoslav Wojtaszek, where rook to h2 was played, but here Magnus just trades. A rook to g1 is played by Levon. Now it's a new move. It's only as of move 17 that we have a completely new game. But Magnus now trades everything. We have knight captures on f1, rook g captures on f1. You don't want to move this rook. You need the control of the d file, and now knight to a4. Offering even more trades. Now the threat is just queen captures knight. So here Levon grabs the knight on a4. Now the knight on a5 is defended. We have b captures on a4. Magnus ruins his pawn structure on the queen side, but it's of little importance, as what he really wants to do is to open lines in front of the white king. We have h5. Levon continues his attack on the queen side, and here comes on the king side, and here comes queen to d7. Queen to d7 is a crucial defensive move, because it will guard the h7 pawn. At some point, Levon will bring the rook and the queen to the h file, threaten h captures g, and you want to have the h7 pawn protected. And the queen from d7 will do a nice job of that, because after pawn captures, you will capture with the f pawn, exposing the queen's defense to the h7 pawn. So here Levon goes rook to h1. He continues with his plan. We have rook f e8, makes room for the bishop. Also, you have to move the bishop if you want the queen to guard the h7 pawn. Queen to h2, and now bishop to f8. And now, like we said, if captures, the queen nicely defends the h7 pawn. White doesn't have an attack going on anymore. So here we have bishop to d2, now wanting to transfer the bishop over here. Will help out with the defense. Rook to c7. Now the queen will be able to move, as the rook will also be able to help out with the defense of the 7th rank, with bishop to b4 now, piling up on the d6 pawn, which is a backwards pawn. Carlsen still didn't have time to push it to d5. We have rook to b8, adding the other rook into the attack, and now rook to d3. Preparing to use it as a defensive piece along the third rank. Also, rook to c3 is an idea at some point. With queen to b5 by Magnus, and here Levon played rook to c3. I will just mention that there is a disgusting engine line that starts with c4, but it's a rapid game, so we're not going to dwell on it for too long. Point of c4 is that it just kicks the queen away, because you cannot capture it. If you capture it, then just knight captures, and you cannot capture back with the rook because of h captures. You need the rook to guard the h7 pawn after f pawn captures, and if queen captures, then rook c3 just wins the rook after you move the queen. So after c4, you would have to move the queen back, and now you play h captures, f captures, while the queen guards this pawn here, and now you just go rook h to d1, saying that you will gladly trade your c4 pawn for the d6 pawn. So this is one way to go about it, but it's for a rapid game. An unlikely move to happen. But okay, rook to c3. We have rook b to c8 now, doubling up on the c file by Magnus. Rook captures on c7, rook captures, and rook to d1 now. Again, piling up on that d6 pawn, and rook to d7. Here Magnus just defends it and hopes to push d5 one day. We have rook to d3 by Levon, and now bishop to e7, attacking the g5 pawn, and here h captures on g6. With f captures on g6, the pawn is not defended, but there is no rook-queen battery along the h file, so it's not a problem for the moment. Queen to d2, again with a triple attack on the d6 pawn. And now comes queen to b6, adding another defender. We have queen to c1, and now comes bishop to d8. Bishop to d8, a very nice move, which after the queen moves, you will put pressure on the knight here, but also you're preparing something else. So here Levon pushes c4, and now comes queen to f2, just infiltrating with the queen, and here knight to c6, attacking the bishop here, but feel free to pause the video here and try to find the best move for black. It's not an easy move to find, but you know, feel free to do it while I give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as it's a magnificent move that starts a brilliant line. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop captures on g5. Deflecting the queen, and you want to deliver queen to f1 check, which will threaten the rook, which will basically force the king to go to c2. But black has a light square bishop, so when you mix that all together, it kind of works. So here we have queen captures on g5. It is the strongest reply. Queen to f1 check, threatening to win the rook, and now king to c2 defending. And here Magnus plays bishop captures on c4, now threatening queen captures on d3. And here Levon has to decide whether he gives up some material back, or does he try to hang on to everything. If you try to hang on to everything, it's well, it's just really difficult. For example, if rook to c3, you get bishop to b3 check, and now you either have to give up the exchange this way, or after you move, now you get d5, and now if you allow the rook to open up the d file, it's game over. So here you do have an option on how to not open it with knight to e7 check, king to f7, and now you can capture on d5 because your knight guards the d5 pawn, but still after queen to f2 check, king to d3. Now you can capture on d5, and well, here after queen captures on e5, it's just a whole mess of the position. In the end, after queen captures on f3 with check, king d4, and now queen back to f2 check, king to d3, and bishop to b7 check, finally open up the discovery from the rook. You go bishop to d6, blocking, and now white will have queen to f6, which will allow him to win back the piece and well, just enjoy being up to connected pass pawns. But it's very hard to calculate. Of course, both of them are very low on time, so neither of them calculated all of it. But both Levon and Magnus realized that there is something there. So Levon doesn't even try to save the rook. He goes queen to e3. We have bishop captures on d3 with check, queen captures, and king captures. And here Magnus forced a trade where he has a rook against a knight and the bishop, but what he has is a passed h-pawn. So what do you do with a passed h-pawn? Of course, you push it. Magnus goes h5 with king to e3. Levon wants to bring the king closer to the passed pawn. King to f7. Now Magnus starts bringing the king into the game. With bishop to c3, And now comes king to e6. We have knight to b4, now attacking the a6 pawn, but now g5. Magnus says that's a doubled a pawn. You can have that. I'm just going to continue pushing my pawn. So king to f2, and now comes rook to f7, threatening g4, which will allow the rook to just gobble up the pawn. King to g2, getting out of the pin, and now g4 nonetheless. We have f captures on g4, and before recapturing, Magnus just pins the pawn. He wants to recapture with the rook and leave the outside passed pawn. So knight to d5 by white, and now comes rook captures on g4. We have king to f3 and now rook to g1. So now the king is cut off from the entire g file. Now Magnus just wants to push his h pawn to victory. We have king to f2. And here something unbelievable happens. Here Magnus played rook to g7, and rook to g7 does not work. Rook to g7 is the, well, maybe not the worst, but one of the worst, well, it's just a bad move. And the reason why it's bad, well, I'm sure you can spot it without even pausing the video, is because it lines up with the bishop. And here, knight to f4 check just picks up the pawn on h5. Because if you capture, now Levon would be winning. So after this check, you have to move the king, and now it's just knight captures on h5. And without the passed h pawn, black doesn't really have compensation with the rook against the knight and the bishop. Black might still hold, but it's going to be very difficult. Problem is, after rook to g7, Levon did not spot knight to f4 check. He was very low on time. He played the king to f3. But it's also such a weird decision. I'm sure Magnus had his reasons, probably to guard maybe c7. He didn't want to allow check or something. But it's a weird decision because whenever your opponent has a dark square bishop, you will always try not to put your pieces on dark squares. Even if there's no immediate danger, you will just have to calculate less, especially if you're low on time. So while I'm sure there's a very good reason why rook to g7 was played, it's just a bad move. With rook to g8, white is without a move, you just continue pushing your passed pawn. However, Levon played king to f3, he didn't see knight to f4 check, and now Magnus just continued pushing the h pawn. Now knight to f4 check doesn't really do anything because you just move the king and there's no pawn for you to grab, you're just going to continue pushing the pawn. After this h4 move, we have bishop to e1, Magnus continues h3, we have bishop to g3, and now rook to b7. Sort of a principle of two weaknesses. This is one weakness white has to worry about, the backwards b2 pawn is the other one. So here Magnus goes after the other one. Knight to b4, but now a5, pushing the knight back, knight to d3, okay, the knight defends the pawn, but now rook to b3. Preparing to capture the knight, you have to defend it, king to e2, and now comes king to f6. Now the king will join this passed pawn and try to escort it. We have bishop to h2, king to g5, now bishop to g3. We have king to g4, and now bishop to h2. And here Magnus just shows that he's really good in the endgame. He plays rook captures on d3. Removes the white king from the defense of the f3 square, and so the black king can now infiltrate. Now the king will come to g2, you can give up this pawn for the bishop. And here Levon goes a king to d2, which here he tries to trick Magnus. If Magnus goes king to g2 right away, then he has king to e2, king captures on h2 and king f2, and it's a draw. For example, king h1, you'll go king to f1, now h2, you're just going to go back, king to f2. And now black has no moves, the only move black has is d5, you're gonna go captures, now e4, d6, you're gonna go e3 with check, king captures, now you're gonna go king to g2, prepare to bring your queen into the game, d7, h1 queen, and you'll have d8 queen, and you'll have this endgame where the queens are on the board, and with both players having 2 pawns on the queen side, which is a draw. So here, Magnus, of course, not interested in that, he picks up the e4 pawn. We have king to e2 and now d5. There are other pawns to advance. We have bishop to g3, now d4. Bishop back to h2, Levon just has to wait and see what happens. We have king to d5, now king to d2 and e4 now. We have king back to e2 and now king to c4. And here Levon goes bishop to e5, again allowing Magnus to make a mistake. Here d3 would be a mistake. Because now you open up the bishop's defense of the pawn here, and also the bishop still covers the h2 square. So here after king to e3, king to b3, yes, you still have the two weaknesses, but after king d2, h2, bishop captures, you can now, yes, capture the b2 pawn, but now the bishop just returns to d6, guards the a3 pawn, and now the a3 pawn will block these two pawns, and the king will do a very nice job guarding these two pawns. So here, another opportunity for Magnus to go wrong, but he doesn't. King to b3. There's no danger of captures because you cannot allow h2. So king to d2, but now we have d3. Now d3 is different because the king is already on d2, so you have to make a move. So what do you do here? King to d1 was played, but now you get e3. So you accomplish something, and you cannot move something other than the king. For example, if you move the bishop this way, then you lose the pawn. If you move the bishop this way, then you allow pawn to h2. So the bishop cannot move. You have to move the king. King d1, now comes e3. We have king to c1 and now king to c4. And it was in this position on move 68 that Levon Aronian resigned the game. And another excellent victory for Magnus Carlsen. Which takes him, I believe, I don't know how the first game went, I think, but we do have the standings here, so we will check it out. And here he just resigns because now you have to make a move. Well, e2, e1 is coming, so whatever you play, let's say bishop d6, you're going to go just bring your king over to let's say f2, bishop goes back, bishop h2, now you're going to go here, and after let's say king d1, king f3, you're going to go king e1, d2 check, king d1, and now king f2, and now there is no defense against e2 and e1 queen. So yeah, after king to c4, that's the game, and here are the standings after 3 rounds of rapid, so let's check them out. Yeah, since you get 2 points for a win in the rapid, Magnus won 2 games and drew 1. So he's on 5 out of 6, so sole first lead for Magnus, followed by Nakamura with 4 out of 6, then Dingliren and Anish Giri, Vishwanathan, Pentala Harikrishna, and Vidit Gujarati with 3 out of 6, followed by Yanni Pomnishi and Levon Aronian and Wesley So with 2 out of 6. So that's the standings after the first day of rapid, but that can change, so tomorrow it could be upside down, you know, you never know. But the important thing is that you have to grab as many points in the rapid section, because rapid games are worth 2 points, and if you win a blitz game you only get 1 point. So usually who wins the rapid wins basically the blitz, but you know, it's chess, anything can happen. So once again, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank David Gill and David Hrib for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this nice tournament, checking up on your suggestion and whatever else happens. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And do check out the interview with Magnus, the first link in the description below. See you soon.